Welcome to the Crosswind Approach podcast. I'm your host, Michael Baldree, CPA. This podcast is for nonprofit and mission-driven leaders who desire to lead with confidence while navigating uncertain conditions. On each episode of the Crosswind Approach, we'll have a conversation with a leader who has traversed real turbulence while leading their organization. Together, we explore the habits that help organizations become resilient and remain mission-focused. If you're leading a mission-driven organization and looking to navigate toward greater clarity and confidence, you're in the right place. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of the Crosswind Approach. Welcome aboard. Welcome to the Crosswind Approach. I'm your host, Michael Baldree, founder of Crosswind CFO Advisory, and we have a great show today. Great guests, Paul Welch, who I'll introduce later. But as you know, this podcast is connecting aviation to nonprofit leadership examples. And as every pilot knows, that the most demanding moments in the cockpit are not the routine ones. They're the moments when everything you've trained for gets tested at once. And leadership in the nonprofit world is no different. So today, we're diving into an extraordinary lesson from aviation, one that unfolded in 208 seconds above the skies of New York City. And we're going to apply that example to nonprofit leadership today. So let's get right into it. On January 15th, 2009, US Airways Flight 1549 lifted off from LaGuardia Airport, bound for Charlotte, North Carolina, and there were 150 passengers and crew on board. And in less than 2 minutes into the flight, at about 3,000 feet above the ground, the aircraft flew into a large flock of Canadian geese. The birds entered both engines simultaneously, and in an instant, Captain Sully and First Officer Jeffrey Skiles had zero thrust. The plane had basically become a glider. Air traffic controller offered Captain Sully a return to LaGuardia or a diversion to a nearby airport in New Jersey, but Captain Sully's instincts, built from over 40 years of flying excellence and his many years of experience, told him that neither of those options would work because they did not have the altitude nor the speed, and he feared that the aircraft would stall. And he made this call in just seconds. He made the call to land the aircraft on the Hudson River. And what happened next defined his leadership. He did not panic. He did not freeze. He calmly told the crew, brace for impact. And he and his first officer guided the aircraft to a near perfect water landing. 3 minutes and 28 seconds after the bird strike, they had landed safely on the Hudson River. All 155 people on board walked away alive. Engineers later called it the most successful ditching in aviation history. Captain Sully was the last person to leave the aircraft, and he walked the cabin twice to make sure no one was left behind. Nonprofit organizations face their own version of dual engine failure. It can be a major grant collapse, a founding leader steps down suddenly, a financial audit reveals the reserves aren't where they need to be or where we thought they were supposed to be. The instruments that normally guide you to go far end up going completely silent. And just like Captain Sully at 3,000 feet above the ground, you don't have time to consult a committee and you have to make a decision. What Captain Sully demonstrated that day was not just piloting skill, it was the power of preparation meeting pressure, the ability to lead calmly when everyone around you is bracing for impact, the discipline to boil a crisis down to its essential and make a decision and work through it one decision at a time. And he had humility to know when you need the whole crew, not just your own instincts, but you need others around you to land the aircraft safely. My guest today has lived that kind of moment in the nonprofit world. Paul Welch, great friend of mine. We met actually on the same floor in college way back, and has just been a great friend of mine throughout almost 20 years now. I'm so excited to have him on the podcast with me. But he's been more than 20 years leading through turbulence across both nonprofit and for-profit worlds. He began his career as an educator in the public school systems, and after several years made the transition to ministry. He served as a discipleship pastor and led multiple teams at 2 different organizations for more than 15 years. Paul then was offered an incredible opportunity to join a fintech startup called Kula, and serves today as their people development manager. Kula is an innovative company that seeks to empower communities around the world by securing and tokenizing real-world assets, unlocking opportunities where traditional finance refuses to go. Kula's model seeks to ensure that financial sovereignty remains in the hands of local stakeholders. So Paul and his team are doing some incredible things. So excited to have you, Paul, on the Crosswind Approach. So glad you're here.
Hey, Michael. So glad to be here, and definitely a lot of memories over the years.
Yes, sir.
Together.
Yes. Paul is one of those guys who will make you laugh at least 5 or 10 times a day if you stay with them long enough. So, hey, Paul, just want to dive right into our first question. When you think back over your leadership journey of 20 years across a few different organizations, what's one story, one moment where the people side of your organization hit serious turbulence? Maybe it's a staffing crisis, a cultural breakdown, a talent loss that shook the team, and everybody to get a little bit anxious because of what was going on in terms of that disruption from the people perspective of the organization.
Yeah, I mean, the hard part is picking which moment.
Okay, yeah.
Because if you've been around any length of time, it's like it happens way more often than we probably would think or care to admit.
Yeah.
But definitely losing key members of your team. Those were some of the shining moments that really came through. Mm-hmm. As you know, especially in the nonprofit world, like those key team members are essential, man. When you find great team members and staff, and like that's gold.
Yeah.
And so not just, talent wise, especially, but also just where heart and talent align to what the nonprofit is all about and the organization is all about, and the talent to actually carry things out to accomplish it.
Yeah.
So I remember losing a key team member, and super talented individual, and it was one of those people who could carry out and execute things like flawlessly. So I think for me, that's such an incredible compliment. I find myself more on the relational side and vision side and things like that. So to have someone key like that was really difficult. And I think not long after, we actually ran into the issue of COVID, like many organizations, trying to relaunch our entire nonprofit organization again.
Wow.
And this was a church context where we relied on volunteer teams across the board. So I kind of thought of it in 2 different roles, one in maybe a staffing and team side that way. But another side in the nonprofit world really is the volunteer piece. A lot of nonprofits are built with a volunteer base.
Yeah.
And so yeah, those were 2 that definitely came to mind, and was a little twitchy to think back on.
Yeah. Yeah. So as you look back on that, so it was a key individual that had been part of your team for a while, who was more on the detail sides of things. Is that right? And maybe a little bit more on the administrative side that allowed you to lead more effectively and with accomplishing your vision with your skills. Is that about right?
Yeah. Yeah, that was, and that was a big deal, because it brought about like questions or concerns to the team.
Okay.
Right. So now it was like, hey, things were going really well. We were kind of cruising, and all of a sudden, on our team, this key person steps away. Well, what does that do? That brings up questions. All of a sudden, everybody's like, well, what's going to happen now? What's going to happen with this? What do you do about this? Well, who's going to do that? And all of a sudden, everyone's got 100 questions.
Yeah.
And I think that's some of those immediate moments. It didn't happen. I remember the story of that miracle on the Hudson, by the way.
Yeah.
Really amazing story. And of course, that happened in a matter of 3 minutes or less. Right?
Yeah.
So this was over a little bit more time, I guess. So
yeah.
But yeah, anytime your team takes a hit of valuable people or key positions, like those are important. And
so as you look back at that, it happened pretty suddenly, which created a lot of anxiety within your team, uncertainty. Looking back, were there any early warning signs in your people or culture that you maybe weeks or months later could recognize as you looked back that maybe you or your team wish you would have picked up on?
Absolutely. I think that's the hardest thing, is taking an honest look back. But I mean, you have to do it, right?
Yeah.
You have to assess kind of like what happened. And I would say there was, I think one of the key things that I noticed was there's this idea of, in this person's case, just like discontent. Anytime we all have discontent constantly, right?
Yeah.
So it's not that that's an issue, but I think one, like for me, one of it's kind of a greatest strength, greatest weakness. On the Clifton Strengths piece, I'm high positivity.
Okay.
Well, I think looking back on it, one of the things that I noticed, in fact, this person actually had, I thought, some really insightful words for me. I remember a phrase that was they said, hey, sometimes I think your positivity can dismiss actual issues. So this idea of a positivity, which is a strength, but actually still needed to be developed, right? And all that. And I think sometimes our greatest strength is our greatest weakness. And that this person, I think, in their reflection would have said, hey, there were some real issues that maybe got glossed over a little bit, unintentionally, right? I think that's, I don't think anyone's judging intention, but I think we unintentionally can pass over things. And I know I've done that, or unintentionally excuse away something because things are either too busy or that doesn't seem like the biggest fire to put out. But those little things build over time. And so if I could go back and do it all over again, like I would do things different and try to notice the little things that stack up over time, as opposed to like waiting until some big major event. Because a lot of times by that time, Michael, it's like it can be too late. And you're like, oh my gosh, this has been going on for how long? Or these frustrations have been boiling. And so I think there's a lot of answers to that, but just reflecting on one of them for me was just looking back and saying, hey, I didn't handle that well. And I wish I could have done it better. So
yeah, that's really good as you share that, because that looking back, you're right, it's not easy, because we all make mistakes, or we have weaknesses, or and anytime I think anybody leads, it's never just one thing. It's a combination of a lot of different things. But still, like you say, to be able to take the time and to have the courage to look backwards and say, hey, how could I have done a better job as a leader? I think is a really wise thing to do, because it gives you context and it helps you be a better leader in the future. So I think that's a great one of the great takeaways I'll take from this conversation is that anytime a key person leaves or anybody leaves, it's wise to look back and, reflect on the journey and think back on some of those key conversations like you just mentioned, because then we can adjust and, go forward and be better leaders and create better culture, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And hindsight's always 2020.
Yeah.
So it's not to necessarily look back and regret, but I think it's an effort to look back in order to grow.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And there's a big difference between those two things. And so I think looking back to grow is, because it is always easier to see the problems and to see the solutions that you should have done back then. But yeah, I've also gotten stuck looking back, but I do think there's a lot of learning to be had. It's you're leading through the fear of the unknown, and then things happen, and I think if we never look back, and I would say maybe an honest look back.
Yeah.
Because I think I've also looked back and said, yeah, that seemed fine. But like an actual honest self-reflection, man, that can be a little painful and can reveal some tough things. But
yeah,
I think the people around us appreciate that when we do that,
Absolutely. I think it shows a lot of maturity. And you bring up a great point that it's helpful to look back so that you can grow, but it's not helpful to look back to like beat yourself up and reflect on things that you can't change, because what's in the past is in the past and we all make mistakes. But it's definitely helpful to look back in the context of having others come alongside you to say, hey, this is what I saw, this is what you saw, and how can we together make this a better culture? I think that's a lot of wisdom in that.
Yeah. And that's really the key, isn't it? The culture piece.
Yep. So when you were in that situation and this key person left, as you look back on that, were there any things that you particularly did to kind of talk with the team about, hey, here's the reality of where we're at. What are you guys feeling? Kind of like naming in the room, hey, this person left because, whatever reason. But I guess, how did you begin to talk about that rather than allowing uncertainty to fester or, to create disunity among the team?
The nonprofit world is an interesting place because a lot of times there's these rhythms to it that dominate our attention. So I think of like, if you're in a church or parachurch ministry, you have these weekly rhythms of, it could be services or programs.
Yeah.
In the education space, it was literal daily lessons that you're putting together. And so these daily and weekly like rhythms and responsibilities, I think unintentionally can kind of dominate our attention and keep us from maybe looking at some of these pieces. So I say that to say that the nonprofit world can have some uniquenesses. Every organization has rhythms, of course, to it, but some of these are very much like huge preparation rhythms that I think are pretty important, and I think can be part of maybe the difficulty, what you're alluding to as far as communication goes. I think one of our biggest communication gaps is, what is it called? The tyranny of the urgent, right? You always have the next thing coming. And so that grabs your attention, and we still have to do that really well because that's your bread and butter. That's the kids need to be taught, and the events need to happen, and all those things still need to go. So I think one of the things is actually trying to slow down. But even if you can't slow down, maybe at least be intentional with some time throughout the week to reflect and to focus on the other parts of your team and area or yourself or your organization that you don't get to all the time.
Yeah.
And I think it's hard to communicate well without doing that.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty key. And I think I think one of the big things for me during that specific time is the amount of like, and it's so simple. That's why it can be so frustrating, but the amount of time that we spend with people. I think we have to realize that we don't run organizations and we don't run teams and we don't accomplish tasks. We actually are supposed to be like stewarding and leading people.
Mm-hmm.
And so just this concept of being, a people organization, and that our tasks and our goals and our vision and our hopes should never run past the people that we're doing this with. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Doing this with and for. I think that's I think that's a big deal. So I think for me, especially being on the relational side, like just spending time with this group of people gets you in close proximity and gives you opportunities for what I would just call the unscheduled conversations.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where you can be around, you can be talking about something, and all of a sudden an issue will come up that you wouldn't have been asked in a meeting or come out in a review, or things like that. And so I think that's a big deal. And I'll also say this, and I'm realizing this more and more, but I definitely lean on this Clifton Strengths piece, where like we really are all like uniquely lead. And so where I may lead out of more of a relational context, other people have different kind of contexts that they lead out of. And I think to recognize not only what those are, but also what they're not, is a big deal.
Yeah.
Because if there's gaps in my team, a lot of times it's just because that may not be a strength that I bring, and I'm going to need to understand that and be able to bring other people around me to do that. And it's always funny, Michael. I know you like super well, and for all of us, and I've seen you and your strengths, but you're incredible. And it's always funny because when I talk to you or other people and they're like, oh yeah, well, I just do this. Whatever our strengths are, we think are like so simple. And it's like, well, everybody knows that.
Yeah.
And it's like, actually, Michael, I just learned something from you because I had no clue about that.
Yeah.
So it is funny. How we do that.
That's very true, that we often take for granted some of maybe our just natural strengths. Because like you said, everybody might have just natural strengths, and they rely on experience that they've had, but not everybody has those natural strengths. They have other natural strengths and they have other experiences. So that's a good context there. You've really brought out an important thing in terms of like, once a key person leaves, it doesn't change the fact that the whirlwind of the business, of the ministry, of the programs, it all stays, it doesn't go anywhere. It still has to be managed. But yet at the same time, you've got this gap of how do we be more intentional about building these on the relational side of things? And are there any practical things that you would do to maybe remind yourself of that? Because I found it so easy to get caught up in the whirlwind of the business that focusing on more of these, not the urgent, but the very important strategic type of things that I know that are going to really build our team, they get lost because of the urgent. So were there any things that reminded you again and again that people are more important than these programs?
If I think it doesn't take long to realize when an organization forgets about that, or when a business or company forgets about that. I think one of the best things is really, and I know it's probably kind of trendy and stuff, but this idea of being like a values-based organization, and there's a difference between aspirational values, like when an organization puts their values on the wall and employees or people walk past and they're like, this is not that. Like this
Mhm.
organization
Yeah.
wants to be these things, but they're
Yeah.
not at all, right?
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with being aspirational in those goals and values, but I do think there needs to be realistic, already like previously held and carried out in the organization values that shine through in in hearts and lives and are seen in actions, if that
Mm.
makes sense. So like,
Yeah.
and typically it has to come from the top down.
Hmm.
So like the whether that's a group of founders or the whoever started the organization, the entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
It's probably things already in them that end up shining through and kind of getting trickled down into the organization. And the reason why those are so important is because they guide the not just the actions of the organization, but actually the culture and feel and kind of tone of
Hmm.
it. And I know one of the things in my current role, I've done a lot of reading on kind of the values and culture piece and everything. And I think it was a former person from Google had said that like you actually can't teach values. People either have them or not, and so that makes the hiring process and
Hmm.
how you hire one of the most important pieces.
Yeah.
Um, but I think there needs to be some gauge of how are we doing on our values, right?
Mm.
Are they aspirational? Do we just think we're doing them?
Mm.
Because especially if we're a couple steps away from what's being carried out or from the end customer or user, um, like we can think we know, but we may not. You know what I
Mm.
mean?
Yeah.
And so, what are those pieces? Sometimes, like I would say, anonymous surveys are great.
Mm.
However, if you don't do anything after a survey,
Yeah.
then people start getting critical and they're like, oh, great, here's another survey.
Yeah.
Like, what are they going to do with it? So I
Yeah.
think,
That's funny.
I, yeah, you've probably been there
Yeah.
where you're like, oh,
Yeah.
you know, and I was honest in that survey and I said this and nobody ever said anything.
Yeah.
It's like, what's done with those?
Yeah.
But those culture-based and value pieces, I know one of the things that I'm working on is just a people profile. And a lot of times you think of it as like, oh, what are their interests and what books do they like? And I'm like, that's fine, but like that's not in this one. It's more of a who, what, where, when, and there's a lot of like resources around it. So like to actually have measurables around each piece of this people
Mm.
profile. So
Wow.
to actually know like who is this person? How are they wired? This is the values piece, right? Like
Yeah.
that's super important.
Wow.
How like how do they operate? That's why I like Clifton Strengths. So you're kind of creating this like this profile. And a lot of times in businesses we get the role and responsibilities piece and their title, and that's the what. Like
Mm.
that's still really important. But if you don't build out those other like who and how and when and all those pieces, it can actually be an incomplete snapshot of that person.
Mm.
And I think what I'm learning over the years is this communication helps me build a more accurate picture or profile, I like the word picture better, of who this individual is, how they operate, what they're supposed to accomplish, when do they accomplish it, and where are they most suited not only for the work that they're doing, but also for the largest impact for the team.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can have, oh man, we have three of these really great people on this team. This team maybe could really use some of that. How do I get them in closer proximity, right? I mean, so you don't have to balance out and necessarily move someone's job in order for them to have a positive impact on a different team. So there's so many parts to us, and to see the people that we work with as individuals and create those full pictures I think can be really rich and very humanizing.
Yeah.
Instead of being pieces, we're actually people.
Wow. Yeah. Instead of being pieces, we're actually people. That's really good. I think you shared a lot of some really, really wise things. I think that last part that you just shared, really knowing somebody and understanding what they bring to the table makes that person feel hugely valuable. And it then connects to longevity, I think. Nobody wants to leave an organization where they feel known and where they know that they make a contribution to the team and the team values that contribution. I think that's huge. I mean, I think you're going to have way more tenure and have people stay long term if you do that well. And I think the other part that you pointed out was really, really wise too, about, in terms of the values. Like if it's great to, like you said, have aspirational values, but if you're not talking about, hey, how are we doing with those on a regular basis, there, I think can be a disconnect. And I love the example of the, give us your feedback, but if you're not willing to do anything with that, that's huge. I remember I worked in the mortgage, banking industry for 9 years, and I worked for like a mom and pop shop for most of those years. And there was actually a box of like, put your suggestions in here, but nobody ever did it because they were afraid that somebody would find out, the owner would find out whose handwriting it was, and they knew it wouldn't go well. And so, having trust that your leaders will listen to you and not judge you, I think is really important too. And all those kind of connect together.
That's a good point. I mean, just the idea of transparency builds trust.
Yeah.
Totally true. Like, I mean, I think a powerful tool for transparency is obviously communication and that, but one of the best ways that someone that I worked with, they described it. They said, hey, like let us in a little bit and let us carry some of the weight. Like there are people on our teams who can carry some of the weight, and we don't have to, as leaders, we don't have to share every little thing all the time. But I think to say, hey, you know what? I think highly of this group, and I have a very talented group of people who I can not only share with, but that'll actually help me share some of the weight, I think is a big deal. Yeah. Otherwise, leadership and being the main person leaves you isolated and carrying things that at some point you can't carry it all. You know what I mean? It can be too much. Yeah. We don't like to admit that, and I want to be really strong, and I do want to increase my capacity, all those things. But man, to try to do that without allowing other people to carry things, I think has been for some has been an easy ticket out of any leadership, because we try to do it all ourselves.
Yeah, that's true.
So
those are you've hit on some really good indicators. If I'm a nonprofit CEO or executive director, and maybe I don't have the skills that you have, Paul, being able to really get a feel relationally of where people are at or where a team's at, you've given us some indicators of, one, like how are you doing on your values, and are you talking to your team about that and willing to listen to the feedback, even if it's negative, on maybe we're not progressing enough with this specific value. And then you've talked a lot about making sure you know your team members and validating how they contribute to the team. And transparency, is another indicator. How transparent is your team? How transparent is your leadership? Because as you said, transparency builds trust, and no one wants to be anywhere for really long when there's not trust, because that that's not a great feeling. And as you were saying that, in addition from the leader's perspective about the leader being able to be transparent enough, also just the overall sense of like psychological safety. Can I actually bring up something in a meeting and I'm not going to be, reprimanded or judged, that I can,
Right.
there's enough trust that I can bring up things in meetings
Yeah.
without having, negative effects. Other than those, because those are some really great indicators. But if you were to like walk into, there's other executive directors and
Yeah.
CEOs listening to the podcast today. And if you were to be able to walk into one of their team meetings, I have no doubt you could, after a day, be able to give us a very accurate assessment of, how cohesive, how well that team's working synergistically together. What are, as you would spend a day with that team, what would be some other things that would clue you in onto whether or not this is a healthy culture, this is a healthy team?
Ooh, that's a good question, Michael. Um, yeah, I'm just gonna do what you mentioned. I'm gonna kind of put myself there, and
Yeah.
so I walk in, and I think I'm first probably reading body language as you go around and greet people.
Mm-hmm.
There is open and closed body language that can
Yeah.
communicate something right away. I think where people are positioned is a big deal. I think who's in the room
Hmm.
of this group is a big deal, and maybe who's not in the room. Um, so I think those would be all pieces that I would, in the first few minutes,
Yeah.
hopefully be able to gather. And you never really know the full story, so I don't want to sound like I can fully assess everything just
Sure.
in a few minutes. But I think those are pretty important. I think, after sitting in an hour long meeting and seeing the interactions of people, hearing how people communicate, I think is super telling.
Hmm.
Um, I know one of the things over the years, Michael, I've had to have a lot of conversations with parents.
Hmm.
So sometimes it's from a volunteer standpoint, or over the years of working with kids, whether in the education or on the church side of things. And so sometimes, our team or our class or something didn't go right, and it's time to say, hey, you know what? I think a phrase that I've used, and I didn't realize it till recently, but I've used quite often, is simply, hey, you know what? That was not how that was supposed to go.
Hmm.
I think this idea of being able to take ownership, people we're more apt to take credit over responsibility a lot of times,
Mm-hmm.
even if our responsibility in that difficulty is small. But just the simple phrase as a leader to be able to say, hey, you know what, I apologize, or hey, that, just so you know, that is not how that was supposed to go, can be a simple, like, disarming phrase where the person's like, oh, okay, so, because here's the thing, we had a plan, and it was supposed to be carried out by this individual this way, and it wasn't. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's the long and short of it. So just because you have it covered by a plan doesn't mean it got carried out perfectly.
Yeah.
So I think how we communicate, that wasn't how that was supposed to go. I think some some things, like, one, can you see the problem? Can you hear the issue? Can you see the problem? Um, and then be able to say, hey, this is what we've done to this point,
Hmm.
is another good phrase. Another one, this is what we're working on, and then another one, this is what still needs to be addressed. I mean, all of those are just like listening to learn, and then your replies are trying to get further clarification and take ownership. Like,
Hmm.
I think those are big and will allow people to continue to communicate.
Yeah.
I've also heard, especially on the leadership side, whether CEOs or founding teams or whatever, say, hey, if you're going to bring a problem, at least bring a solution or two, on the other side of it. I think that's
Yeah.
always a good idea,
Mm-hmm.
So I do think the morale piece, to be able to, like, what's the energy in the room, I think is a big read too. Are people open to being wrong? Do we hear the values, and do we see the values on the wall in the meeting? If we're sitting around the table, those should be reflected in an hour-long meeting at some point, maybe even referred to, or at minimum an effort to practice. Like, so I think those would be some things. I think how willing are the people to be transparent? Guarded people are usually not very transparent people. And if people are guarded, it's usually out of fear. Fear is not a great motivator.
No.
So it's like you can have a team that's in line and is fearful of you, and it's not going to be a very productive team. It's not going to be a high performing team. I think those are Patrick Lencioni, of course, has great resources as far as teams go. I'm a big fan of a lot of what he's put out over the years. But I think that time, spending time with the team, and then I think sitting down with individuals in their offices really helps me see how well do we balance accomplishing our tasks and goals and actually being a people-focused team.
Yeah.
And I think people love people-focused teams, but they also love to get things done. They also want to say, hey, we're going after something really important, so let's knock it out. So I think how we balance that is super important. And it's some people are either very task oriented, and they can crush and get a lot done. And other people, for me, I'm very people oriented. So I need to make sure that I'm dialed in on accomplishing the things that need to be done in the right amount of time. So I think just knowing, here's what I would say, Michael, I think is one of the keys is this whole idea of being self-aware. Like unaware people hurt every system. You can have a great system, but if you're unaware, or if it's led by people who aren't aware, maybe how they show up or how others are showing up, I think there has to be some way for a leader, even if that's not them, that they have someone that they can go to say, hey, I'm looking for a pulse or a read on this. I think that's really key, just that EQ, IQ piece, of realizing who I am, who I'm not, being comfortable in that, and bringing people around you that can help offset that, I think is just so important.
Yeah, those are excellent, Paul. I really, really resonated with that last part of unaware people hurt teams, even if it's unintentionally, but if their unawareness has the ability to really do some damage.
And I think the positive side is aware people can be a gift.
Yeah, absolutely.
To their teams.
Yeah.
And they don't need a position to do it.
Yeah. And you can,
Yeah.
And you can grow in that awareness, so even if you might find yourself, not practicing that awareness or growing in that, you can begin and it can transform, your team dynamics for sure.
Yeah. And even going back to that story that I started with, where I had a really great, talented person tell me something that I was like, dang it, I didn't realize that. I just didn't know.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
Because we don't know what we don't know.
Exactly.
And so it's not if I knew it or not, it's just, am I willing to learn it?
Yeah. And I think that's where teachable, if you're teachable, you can be a great leader. If you're, allow pride to not let yourself be teachable, it can it can create a lot of problems. If I bring this kind of full circle and we think back on Captain Sully, when those birds hit the engine, it was a major crisis, and there's the human tendency to just like freeze and to be paralyzed and not know what to do. Thankfully, and for the 150 passengers on board, Captain Sully didn't do that, and his training allowed him to respond quickly and appropriately. Right now, I'm sure there's a nonprofit CEO and executive director somewhere in the world, and perhaps maybe listening right now, who's just lost a major team member that they've, spent years working with, they've invested in, they had plans of how this team dynamic was going to go great lengths and accomplish great things. And they didn't see this coming at all. And this person just gave them the news that they're leaving. And there's this tendency to just be paralyzed and freeze. Or maybe they're listening to this podcast and they've heard some of the indicators that you brought up that, hey, this might signal that your team is not as healthy as you think. What advice would you give them after they just got this news that this person's leaving that might help them move beyond being paralyzed and take action?
That is the biggest piece, isn't it? I remember in this situation and then one other situation, to be able to sit back, put all the responsibilities of your team on a board and prioritize them, and be able to, there's a very practical side, and just be able to say, okay, so what's the most important, and make sure that the most important things are continuing. That could be a very good step one in a couple hours, right?
Yeah.
I think too, noticing the people around you. Again, if you have people on your team who can and are willing to carry weight, to be able to say, hey, you know what, for this in-between time, would you be able to carry this? I think that's a good time for transparency to say, because here's the thing, like everyone can feel it. When that key person leaves, everyone is going like, oh boy, like how is things going to look now?
Yeah.
And it's not that you have to have all the answers or have to be able to pick everything up and do it all yourself, but you also can't just release it all to everyone else either.
Yeah.
Right? It's this shared weight. It's the shared responsibility. And so I think being able to practically sit down, prioritize those responsibilities so that the biggest things don't get dropped. But I think also realizing who's around me, and to be able to say, hey, for this season, until we find whoever that next person is, and they actually get time to on-ramp and step into some of these roles, they could be right next to you.
Yeah.
And if you've been unaware, or if you haven't gotten to know your team super well, you may not know it.
Yeah. Excellent. Those are really good, Paul. If those listening today would like to learn more about you and the work you're doing at Kula, I wish we would have had more time to talk about the work you're doing at Kula, because it sounds fascinating with the unconventional way of investing. But if they wanted to find out more about you, Paul, or Kula, where should they go and how could they connect with you?
Well, Kula.com, there's actually a whole white paper that explains what we're doing. You can sign up for a newsletter via email. And so there's, definitely learn and explore that way. It is pretty interesting. So, but to connect with me personally, my email address of just Paul Welch 455 at Gmail.
Okay.
And I'm just finishing up becoming a Clifton Strengths coaching training.
Oh, awesome.
So I'm going to be starting that here in the near future. And so looking forward to being able to help people and teams.
Yeah. So teams could connect with
through that lens.
Yeah. Who might need some help and support with that. That's great. And you're also on LinkedIn and Facebook, right? So they could connect with you.
Yeah. Yes. LinkedIn, Facebook,
awesome.
Paul Welch. And then, definitely social media. I think I've I'm on Facebook and Instagram, and that's about it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time and your wisdom. Incredible people person. If you or your team need support with improving your culture, I encourage you to reach out to Paul. He is an excellent practitioner with building great cultures and teams. Before we close today, I always like to give a weekly Crosswind checklist in terms of making sure your finances are optimized and your best practices are in place. And so here are 3 best practices I think you need at your nonprofit. One is know exactly where every dollar is going and why. And you really need to make sure you're applying rigorous discipline to functional expenses and how those are allocated. You need to be able to make sure those are categorized correctly and making sure that all of those are categorized appropriately for management, fundraising, program services. The accuracy of all that really helps make your Form 990 accurate, and accuracy builds trust not only with your board and team, but more importantly, your donors. Number 2, never let restricted funds fly without a flight plan. You need to have a plan for how you're tracking restricted and unrestricted funds, and your team needs to know what's really available. And when you're not categorizing restricted and unrestricted correctly, you can get into some real problems. So make sure that restricted and unrestricted funds are categorized correctly, and there's good communication surrounding those. Finally, run a monthly budget to actual review. If your budget is not a living document and it's just something you put together and then you don't look at it for another year, that's a problem. Your budget needs to be a living document that you're constantly looking at to help you know where you and your team are at and what adjustments you need to make. So those are 3 financial best practices I'd encourage you and your team to have in place. If you need support with that, reach out to me. I'm the founder of Crosswind CFO Advisory. Would love to help you with that. If today's episode resonated with you, here are 3 things I would ask you to do right now. Subscribe to the Crosswind Approach podcast so you never miss an episode. Leave a review. It's easy to do on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It just takes a minute, and it helps other mission-focused leaders like you find the show. And finally, share this episode with a leader in your network who could use it today. If you're listening to this podcast and you've navigated your own moment of organizational turbulence, I would love to hear your story. Find me on LinkedIn and let's connect. Ladies and gentlemen, you have reached your final destination. Thank you for choosing the Crosswind Approach podcast. Now go lead your mission with clarity, confidence, and courage. We will see you on the next flight. Take care. Thank you for joining me on the Crosswind Approach. If today's conversation helped you think differently about leadership, financial clarity, or navigating uncertainty, I would encourage you to subscribe to the podcast and share this episode with another mission-driven leader. And if you'd like to learn more about my work as a CPA and fractional CFO supporting nonprofits and mission-focused organizations, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. You'll find the link in the show notes, and I'd love to continue the conversation there. Until next time, keep your instruments calibrated, your communication clear, and your mission moving forward.